The Untold Stories of Fort Myers Beach is made possible in part by the town of Fort Myers Beach and the Lee County Board of County Commissioners.
Memories, recollections, facts, and figures make up the life stories we pass down from generation to generation. These oral and written histories about the people and places of our past shape how we live today. Together, let's relive some of the untold stories of Fort Myers Beach. We'll meet the special people and places that make up this former fishing village, and we'll hear about the community's efforts to preserve their island history and sustain its unique character in the face of development. Long before it was known as Fort Myers Beach, thousands of years ago, Estero Island was home to Calusa Indians.
Native American peoples first moved into Florida about 10,000 years ago. And during that time, we were at the end of the Pleistocene, which was a period of glaciation. And so much of the world's ocean water was tied up in these enormous ice sheets that actually the ocean levels were considerably lower, about 180 feet lower than they are today, which means the Gulf of Mexico would have been about 100 miles further west than it is today. As these huge glaciers melted, sea level began to rise quite rapidly. And modern sea level, where the water is today, was reached about 4,000 BC or so. And a couple thousand years after that, Estero Island formed as a barrier island. The earliest known evidence for occupation on Estero Island as an island would be this Indian mound here at the Mound House. And that first started accumulating around 100 BC, and they had completed constructing the mound around 700 AD. Even though they abandoned this site at 700 AD, they continued coming back to the site, perhaps a family hunting ground. And they were repairing their nets, they were opening shellfish, extracting meat, cleaning fish, and these activities took place around the periphery of the mound, probably into the 15th century. It's in the 16th century when the Europeans first arrived.
The Spanish arrived in the 16th century, and soon after the Calusa abandoned their villages. Their lifeways and values were incompatible with those of the Spanish explorers.
Ponce de Leon arrives here in southwest Florida in San Carlos Bay on June 4 in 1513. He's actually attacked by a number of Indians in 20 canoes. The Spanish actually kill quite a few of these Indians. They capture a few of their canoes. We don't hear much about the Calusa for another 50 years until Menendez establishes a mission on Mount Key. And after 3 years, the Calusa abandoned their village because they cannot live together with the Spanish. 80 to 90% of the Native Americans in North America died because of European diseases for which they did not have any natural immunities.
The 1880s saw the next significant period of settlement on the island with the arrival of homesteaders.
The first homestead grant on Estero Island was here at the Mound House. The Gilberts moved here in 1889. The Gilberts don't stay very long. They actually sell the property to the Cases. They build a little Tudor house here in 1906 and add on to that again in 1909. One of the things that I think is interesting about the early homestead period, or this early pioneer period in Florida, is life actually continues very much in the Calusa realm. A lot of people are living on top of Calusa mounds because they provide high ground and safety from storms.
In the 1880s, the Koreshans began establishing their colony.
Into the 1900s, the people who came and lived at the south end of this island and bought from the homesteaders and were homesteaders themselves were the Koreshans. They were here under the guidance of a man named Dr. Cyrus Teed, who called himself Koresh because the name Cyrus in the Bible is translated into Koresh. He came from Chicago in 1894. And they built a sawmill down at the south end of the island and began building. And they had, 3 houses, 2-story houses down at the south end. They had a post office. In 1894, they opened the first post office on Fort Myers Beach, but they called the address Estero. And so the Koreshans, by 1902, they had 200 members living down here. It was very, very big and very successful. The Koreshans believed in what he called a cellular cosmogony. He decided that they lived on the inside of the earth, like on the inside of an egg. And what you saw in the sky was the inside of the egg.
Significant change began when the first bridge connecting the island to the mainland was built in 1921.
Until the 1920s, there wasn't much movement on the island because we had no bridge. What happened in 1921 was that the bridge was built, the first bridge to Fort Myers Beach. This was a wooden bridge, it was a drawbridge, and you had to pay 52 cents to go over, plus 4 cents of war tax, even though we were not at war. May 21st, 1921 is when the bridge officially opened, and everybody wanted to come to the beach, everybody. So we had the Model Ts, Model As, and everything else, and they drove on the beachfront. And the beachfront was so wide, they could drive 5 cars abreast.
The bridge brought more people to the island, but recurring hurricanes made some question the move.
When the hurricane came in October of 1921, it absolutely devastated the things that were on the island. There were 2 casinos, the Seminole Sand Casino and the Gulf Shore Inn, which still exists. But everything was devastated. And so the people who owned it had to take another look at Fort Myers Beach and say, do we want to rebuild? It took until 1923 to really rebuild everything. In 1926, we had another hurricane that came through here, and it was so bad that it actually created a second island, San Carlos Island. It opened up a new pass, cut off the mainland into an island, and they call it Hurricane Pass for obvious reasons.
Fort Myers Beach in the 30s lacked amenities, and housing was primitive. Islanders did most of their living outdoors, so houses were small.
I was always told there were only about 5 houses when I was born, but there may have been a few more, but there were very few. People lived in houseboats at that time because there were not enough houses, and it was primitive land.
And there weren't too many buildings there. There was no post office, no gas station, no anything for quite a while, no bank.
Back on the back bay, it was hideous. I've seen times when you could look at the window screen and you couldn't tell whether it was a new moon or full. It'd be that black with mosquitoes. But we didn't know any better, and we didn't have air conditioning. We thought we were in paradise.
But the mentality in the 20s and 30s was that we lived out of a house instead of in a house. We used the house to have our meals, to sleep, but the rest of the time we were outside.
The Beach Hotel and its pier were the center of island life in the 30s.
There was the Beach Hotel, which my grandparents bought in 1936. And at that time it was just the hotel building with 10 small bedrooms upstairs. It had been built about 1912 by Dr. and Mrs. Winkler.
They had a lot of guests all the time and bridge parties, and it was a great place. And they had a pier going out right in front of it that went out over the water.
I spent an awful lot of time on the pier, and that was the only pier then, and it's opposite the hotel. And fishing was good, and you could just while away hours there fishing or just watching fishing. A lot of action.
We'd go down there on the pier to watch the sunset a lot of times, just to have something to do in the evenings, because early on we didn't have a theater or we didn't have any drugstores or any place like that to go to.
The island's reputation grew, attracting visits from the rich and famous.
Famous people discovered Fort Myers Beach in the 30s and in the 40s, and we had, interestingly enough, it seemed to me, we had people from California who were in films. You know, find Fort Myers Beach, love it, come back, come back, come back. Myrna Loy was a friend of my mother's, and they just laugh and laugh and laugh. They had a wonderful time, and she would come and stay for weeks at a time.
Well, Fort Myers Beach Hotel was an icon, a place of comfort. The people who came there were people who repeated year after year, including the famous people who came there. Lindbergh was a frequent visitor. He was known well to the Newtons, and his wife Anne, and we would hang on the fence out front to get a glimpse of these people. And we just felt like we were in the center of American history at that time.
Mrs. Edison was a great pal of my grandmother's. They used to play golf together in Fort Myers, and she was my godmother. And she would bring me a little present and stay for the afternoon.
Fort Myers Beach residents paid for their children to be taught in a small rented cottage before the community raised money to build a 2-room schoolhouse.
They had to pay the rent for the cottage, which was called the Mayhew Page Cottage. Money wasn't plentiful in those days, and they chipped in, and the mothers paid for the school, and the county or state provided us with a teacher, which was just out of college, and she was paid $75 a month to be the janitor and the teacher for 3 grades.
I went to school of first grade at Fort Myers Beach, and it was a 1-room schoolhouse that 3 grades were in. And I think there was only 16 or 17 of us children in the whole class. But we got to know all the kids that way, and you know, it just made it was a community.
When they built the new school in 1938, there was 2 classes.
The school had about 30 students. To me, the always interesting thing was that we had 1 room for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, other room 4th, 5th, and 6th. Raising money to pay off that school was a huge part of my school life.
Lois Alexander was a school teacher back then. One morning, she went by. She had a little black Model A Ford coupe. She went by and she saw me waiting for the bus. So she went on to the school, and I never got there on the school bus. She came back and got me. I was just about ready to get in my boat to go fishing. And she got me and brought me back and put me in school.
The Chapel by the Sea was the only church on Estero Island in the 30s and early 40s. Although a Presbyterian church, it was attended by residents of all denominations.
There was only one church. It was run by and pastored by a Presbyterian minister. And he would have Sunday school and church, and also in the summertime they would have a school. You know, you didn't have to be Presbyterian. Anybody could come, and they did.
It was very much a community church. Chapel by the Sea seated people in folding wooden chairs. There were 2 rooms on the back with a kitchen in the middle where we could have Sunday school and we could have classes.
Fishing was a major attraction of Fort Myers Beach. Life was hard for commercial fishermen, but recreational anglers were elated to find mackerel, kingfish, mullet, redfish, and the sports fisherman's prize, snook.
I can remember when there was not anything to do on the island, you know, except something with the fish business or something like that. So I guess it just came natural for people like me to be there and be in it.
The fisher people in the community were really hard workers. They were up early in the morning, they worked late at night, they absolutely worked year-round.
The red tides kill more fish than fishermen ever dreamed about catching.
Mackerel and kingfish used to run here the kings ran in January and February. And I mean within 3 miles of the island, you could go out and with a hand line and a spoon, you could just fill as many garbage cans as you wanted to until you got tired of catching them. And the same way with mackerel in June and July. And at the end of the pier, which was then in the middle of the island, my mother loved to fish on the pier. You could catch trout and mackerel all day long, all summer.
Everyone talked about redfish and how great they were to eat, probably the best eating fish we had. But the big talk was the snook. The snook was absolute king.
During World War II, Fort Myers Beach was transformed as soldiers conducted training exercises on the beach.
During the war, the population increased dramatically because of the 2 air bases we had in Fort Myers. It was quite fascinating because they did their maneuvers out over the Gulf, not too far off.
And we had blackout curtains, and we had to have our headlights painted half black, and everything there was not a chink of light to be seen on this island after dark. The truth of the matter is there were German subs out in the Gulf. They were so smart. In the daytime, they'd surface and put up a sail. We thought it was a sailboat. We didn't think, you couldn't see that far out. It just looked like a sailboat. We had evidence that they came to our grocery store shopping, and one of them was washed up on the beach with a ticket to the arcade theater in his pocket. So evidently they came to Fort Myers for recreation.
Soldiers that came through here saw this paradise, and immediately, as I say, 47, you could really feel it. But beginning, as soon as the war was over in 45, we began to get returnees who had passed through here.
In the 50s, pink gold was discovered in the waters around the island. Shrimping was a lucrative livelihood, and Fort Myers Beach became a major shrimping port.
I got married and came back to Fort Myers Beach, and I bought a charter boat and started running charter boats until the shrimping came in, and I figured I'd make more money shrimping. And then I shrimped for about 18, 20 years. Shrimping, you're going for 2 or 3 weeks. I spent 43 days on one trip. You use those big trawl nets on the shrimp boats, you know. We started out with one great big net, and then they went to 2 big nets, one on each side. Now they're going four nets, two on each side.
In those days, most of the shrimp went to the packers in Tampa. We didn't have too much delivered right around Fort Myers Beach. Later, the freezer plant, the Sandcastle Island freezer plant was started, and my husband was one of the partners. And after he passed away, I became a partner. For years, the shrimping business was more lucrative than it is today, but it's still a good living. But my sons had boats afterwards, but they've all sold them now, and they're getting to the age that they didn't want to be out in the water all the time.
Tourists discovered Fort Myers Beach in the 50s, and the resorts and hotels added rooms to accommodate them.
My dad came home one night and he said, "Well, I thought you all might like to know I just went and bought a piece of property." So he bought his first piece of the family's first piece of property in 1951 at the north end of the island. And then we gradually started adding more and more cottages to what we had down here. And by 1958, we had a cottage colony. We did indeed name it the Pink Shell because we had all these little cottages and they were all pink. When we first started our business down here, we didn't have a bank on the island. We barely had a grocery store on the island. And there was no place on the island where if you had to buy sheets or towels or any of the many things that you have to have for a resort.
The small beach cottages could no longer accommodate tourists flocking to the beach. The era of the condominium was about to begin.
Because in the late 70s, the first condominium was built. It was a privateer, it's still here, down at the south end, and it only had a couple of stories. But the second condo that was built by someone who'd been here since the 1940s, Leonard Santini. And when he built a condo, you know, it was like 7 or 8 stories high. You have to picture Leonardo Arms. It looked like a dinosaur on a desert because there was nothing down there but sand. And here's this enormous building, you know, so people would drive down there and just watch it.
We sold the Pink Shell Resort in 1999, and at that time it was 179 units, mostly cottages and apartments. It had grown to 12 acres. And then as the new owners came in, they had different ideas than our little pink cottages, so they started modernizing it and removing some of the cottages. I love the cottages. And the day that the Pink Shell became high-rise instead of the little cottages was a mixed day. You feel proud that it turns into something beautiful and magnificent the way it is, but it's bittersweet because you love the cottages too and you liked what it was.
1995 marked a new beginning for Fort Myers Beach when residents voted to incorporate as a city, controlling their own development and preserving what was left of their history.
The people in the town got scared that we were going to end up looking like Miami Beach. And so they had another attempt at incorporation. They'd had 5 shots at it since 1949. They tried it. And they turned it down every time.
But in 1995, a movement was started to incorporate the island, and on July the 25th of 1995, the island became incorporated officially on December the 31st of 1995. So now we have our own town government, our own town hall, our own town ordinances, etc.
For the residents on the island, I believe that they see that, the majority of them, as a positive thing, because as the beach has grown over the years and more issues have come to pass, they feel that they have much more of a say in the future of the island and the future of their homes.
We have our struggles sometimes with different factions on the island, but for the most part, the people who are now glad that the island is incorporated see us as trying to do pretty much the same thing. We're trying to do preservation. We started our Historic Society in 1995, and it's too bad we didn't know to start it sooner.
The preservation of the Mound House was one historical and environmental success.
The town of Fort Myers Beach was incorporated in 1995, and around that time, Mrs. Long had just passed away. The family, the Longs had no direct children, but they had a number of nieces and nephews that they left the property to, and they were potentially going to sell the land to a developer. And so the town worked very quickly and very hard at attaining grant funds for this piece of property. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Mound House property is its time depth. On this property, we have represented every major period of Florida history and prehistory, starting 2,000 years ago and leading up to the present. That allows us to do educational programming on a scale that few other properties can offer.
Another success is the growth of the arts. The Fort Myers Beach Art Association was founded 50 years ago by a group of artists who wanted to paint together. Now, arts on the beach encompass music, theater, and film.
The Art Association has lasted over 50 years. And everybody in that group, all those years, has had a wonderful time with the association. It was a group of people who wanted to paint together. And as they got a few more people, then it began to grow. Eventually they were able to get a location. And the following year, they had enough money that they could fill it and make that their first building, which is still in use. And it was a wonderful thing to have a building and where you could come and you could paint.
As far as the artist community is concerned, we have a fabulous art association here. You see them everywhere you go. In the parks, you see them. I recall one time when the Beach Theater was just built, I saw an artist in the parking lot painting the building. They've painted our fire hydrants in the Times Square area. It's so cute, and it's a great group of people.
About 4 years ago, when we built our own theater, we went into the Orpheus Cafe, a Greek restaurant, and built the stages and brought in cans, our own cans, and clamp lights to light the stage. And we went back into the kitchen as our dressing room, and we started doing off-Broadway productions. Now, since that time, we have built another theater in the Holmes House. You have the film festival going on. You've got incredible musicians that live here, actually world-class musicians who are Grammy Award winners. I think this is an ideal location for an artist colony.
I think coming down to the island has given me an opportunity to kind of reinvent myself. When I got down here, nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew anything about me. No one had heard me sing. No one knew that I was a songwriter. Nothing. The community, I feel, has for the most part been extremely receptive to the idea of real, healthy, vibrant, active art community. Because I think it's been needed, it's been missing. There's so many people here from so many walks of life.
I think I found a place where I want to stay. And as the setting sun spills its colors across the azure skies, I
I think I was very fortunate as a child to have the freedom to roam the beach.
And we ran down on the beach, towering on both sides of this little sandy path. On both sides of us were huge sea oats, 6 times the size we were, because we were just little.
We probably never wore shoes, and our feet got so tough that we could put up with all the sand spurs and the rocks as we walked down the sand roads.
And if we wanted some water down there, they didn't have water, we'd get a coconut out of a tree and drink the coconut. And it would quench your thirst.
Growing up here, I lived in the water. We did everything out there. I mean, we swam and we fished and we boated and we skied and we did everything out in the water.
The waters were crystal clear. You could see down at the bottom, you could see the fish swimming around.
To order a video of this program, call 1-888-824-0030 or visit our website at wgcu.org. And please refer to the program number on your screen.